that which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo, called retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title.
A rose is a rose is a rose. And torture is torture is torture.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we did some things that were wrong. We did a whole lot of things that were right, but we tortured some folks.
Obama's remarks, delivered at a White House press conference on August 1st, have already passed through infamy to become part of the internet lexicon. But why? He did not tell us anything new. Did not impart any information that added to our understanding of the sexual assault, sleep deprivation, mock executions, forced medications, temperature extremes, or waterboarding that the US military and CIA have admittedly deployed on their captives in the years since 9/11.
The CIA has apparently misled the U.S. government and the public for years about aspects of a controversial interrogation program, concealing details of harsh treatment of detainees. This is all according to a report released by the Washington Post that reveals the thoughts of U.S. officials who have already seen a forthcoming Senate Intelligence Committee report expected to expose the program. According to U.S. officials who remain anonymous, the 6,300 page report includes what they've described as disclosures regarding a sprawling network of secret detention facilities, or black sites. These sites were ultimately dismantled by President Obama in 2009, but before then, prisoners were allegedly subjected to harsh interrogation techniques, even when analysts were sure there was no more information prisoners could reveal.
No, we already knew that. This is not why Obama's words are so remarkable. Less than 1 week after this speech, New York Times executive editor Dean Backwit came out with a remarkable statement of his own. Over the past 2 months, read the statement, reporters and editors of the Times have debated a subject that has come up regularly ever since the world learned of the CIA's brutal questioning of terrorism suspects, whether to call the practices torture. When the first revelations emerged a decade ago, the situation was murky. The details about what the Central Intelligence Agency did in its interrogation rooms were vague. The word torture had a specialized legal meaning as well as a plain English one. While the method set off a national debate, the Justice Department insisted that the techniques did not rise to the legal definition of torture. The Times described what we knew of the program, but avoided a label that was still in dispute, instead using terms like harsh or brutal interrogation methods. The Times claims that its sudden abandonment of the English language over the past decade in favor of tortuous, concocted phrases like enhanced interrogation methods, itself first coined by the Nazi Gestapo in 1937 to describe their own identical torture techniques, was necessary to preserve the distinction between common usage of the word torture and its legal definition. This is a lie. The new standard that the Times is using to employ the term, incidents in which we know for sure that interrogators inflicted pain on a prisoner in an effort to get information, is almost word for word identical to the definition under U.S. law, specifically 18 U.S. Code 2340, an act committed by a person acting under the color of law specifically intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain or suffering. The definition was always what the Times is now claiming they have discovered it to be. That they are now going to call torture torture should not be remarkable. And yet these things are remarkable. Why? Because words, language, names have been used to obscure political realities for so long that when facts are simply described in plain language, it is nearly unfathomable. The phenomenon of doublespeak is nothing new. As Orwell wrote in his classic essay, Politics and the English Language, in our time, political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. Things like the continuance of British rule in India, the Russian purges and deportations, the dropping of the atom bombs on Japan, can indeed be defended, but only by arguments which are too brutal for most people to face, and which do not square with the professed aims of the political parties. Thus, political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question-begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. Defenseless villages are bombarded from the air, the inhabitants driven out into the countryside, the cattle machine gunned, the huts set on fire with incendiary bullets. This is called pacification. Millions of peasants are robbed of their farms and sent trudging along the roads with no more than they can carry. This is called transfer of population, or rectification of frontiers. In fact, historians tell us that this phenomenon occurs almost as far back in history as we are prepared to look, back even to the 5th century BC.
Is there any example in history, ancient history, in literature, of doublespeak?
Yes, one I cite just as a passing example is Thucydides in the 5th century BC in the Peloponnesian War. During the war, there was a very vicious civil war in Athens at that time. And Thucydides points out that at that time, the very language itself became corrupted to their own ends. Acts of cowardice became acts of great bravery. Traitorous deeds towards friends became patriotic acts, and he cites the whole list. And it's interesting that Thucydides cites this corruption of language as the ultimate in horror that occurred during that civil war.
But in our current age, when virtually every act of the criminal and almost universally reviled political class requires this reality inversion, any speaking of the plain truth is a revolutionary act. It is sometimes said that words are merely words, and that, carrying no weight, they have no relevance in the real world. On the contrary, as the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein noted nearly a century ago, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. What is not expressible is not conceivable. If the victims of U.S. aggression are always and everywhere described as terrorists and human shields and war criminals, let alone gooks or nips or sand niggers, then defenders of those populations are at a disadvantage before they even begin their defense. Their opponents are defending heroes and patriots and freedom fighters, so how can they lose the argument? Merely putting a word in the form of a derogatory phrase creates in the mind of the listener the impression of something unsavory. People who care about the truth are mere truthers, after all. 10th Amendment supporters are tenthers. Those who prepare for the future are preppers. Want to demonize someone who does good things? Call them a do-gooder. Language is the great tool of the tyrants. It always has been, and always will be. Patriots are expected to abide by a Patriot Act that destroys their Bill of Rights, support surgical strikes against enemy combatants by the Department of Defense, and cheer the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to those who wage war. Our language has been weaponized against us. Taking our cue from Orwell, then, we might observe that telling the truth is a revolutionary act, and calling things by their right name a revolutionary idea. Yes, a rose is a rose is a rose, and torture, by any other name, is still torture. Down with Big Brother. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information